My mom ruined my wedding by making my sister claim she was pregnant by my husband. What happened next was shocking. Growing up, it had always been the three of us, me, Lily, and Mom. We were a small, tightly knit unit, surviving together after Dad left when I was 8, and Lily was just 5. His absence wasn't something we dwelled on, and I can't say I missed him. If anything, his departure had only strengthened our bond. Mom stepped in as both parents, holding us together with an unyielding determination. She used to say we were like the legs of a tripod. If one of us faltered, the whole thing would collapse. For most of my life, I believed that wholeheartedly. Lily and I were opposites in nearly every way. I was the responsible one, always careful, always planning. Lily was the free spirit, wild and adventurous, climbing trees in the backyard, coming home with scraped knees and a grin that stretched from ear to ear. She was fearless, and I was her shadow, running behind to make sure she didn't break a bone or get herself into trouble. Despite our differences, we were inseparable. When Mom worked late, I became the caretaker, helping Lily with homework, cooking dinner, and tucking her into bed. I even taught myself how to braid her hair, though my attempts often ended in tangles we had to laugh through. She was my little tornado, a whirlwind of chaos and joy that I wouldn't have traded for anything. But looking back now, I see how much of my life revolved around her. Protecting her wasn't just something I did, it was who I was. I missed out on school dances, parties, and even simple teenage freedoms, all because Lily needed me. I didn't resent it then, or at least I told myself I didn't. That's just what family was, right? What Mom had always said, family first. Us against the world. That belief carried me into adulthood, unchallenged, until I met Daniel. For the first time, I had someone who was mine, someone who made me feel seen and loved outside of my role as Lily's protector. It was new, exciting, and terrifying. And Lily, well, she began to drift. At first, it was small things, like skipping our weekly coffee dates or brushing off my calls. I didn't think much of it, assuming she was busy figuring out her own life. But now, looking back, I wonder if that distance was the first thread unraveling everything we had built. When Daniel and I got engaged, it felt like the start of a new chapter, one where I could finally focus on my own happiness. The wedding planning consumed my time, and I poured myself into every detail. The dress, the flowers, the venue, it was everything I had dreamed of since I was a little girl. As the day approached, I was consumed by a mix of nerves and excitement. This was supposed to be my happily ever after. Then the message came. It was from Mom, a simple text, "We need to talk. Now." The urgency in her words sent a chill down my spine. Mom wasn't one to exaggerate, so if she said it was urgent, I knew it had to be serious. I hoped it was something minor, maybe a last-minute wedding detail that needed fixing. But deep down, I felt the unease blooming. When I arrived at Mom's house, I was met with an atmosphere so heavy it felt like stepping into a storm. Mom and Lily were sitting in the living room, their faces pale and eyes red, as if they'd been crying. The tension was suffocating, pressing down on me as I took a seat. Mom's hands trembled as she gestured for me to sit, her voice low and shaky as she began speaking. Lily sat beside her, looking fragile in a way I'd never seen. Her usual carefree demeanor was gone, replaced by an air of guilt and fear. Her eyes avoided mine, fixed on the floor as she fidgeted with her dress. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. I could feel it in the way the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the words that would change everything. Mom broke the silence with a bombshell. Lily was pregnant. My heart stuttered at the revelation, but before I could process that, the second blow came. Lily claimed that Daniel, my Daniel, the man I was about to marry, was the father. The world tilted on its axis. The words echoed in my mind, growing louder with each repetition. Daniel? My Daniel? This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of sick joke, a misunderstanding, anything but the truth. Yet the looks on their faces told me otherwise. Mom's expression was heavy with sadness and worry, while Lily's face crumbled under the weight of her own words. She stammered through her explanation, insisting it had been a mistake, a one-time thing that was never supposed to happen. But none of that mattered. The damage was done. I sat frozen, disbelief crashing over me like a tidal wave. Betrayal burned through my chest, sharp, unbearable. My sister, the person I had loved and protected my entire life, and my fiancé, the man I had trusted with my future, had both torn my world apart. I wanted to scream, cry, lash out, anything to release the storm inside me, but all I could do was sit there in stunned silence. Memories of Daniel and Lily flooded my mind, now colored with suspicion. Their laughter at family dinners, the times they spoke in hushed tones when I wasn't in the room, moments that had once seemed innocent now felt like evidence. Had I been blind? Had I missed the signs? I tried to piece it together, but every thought led to more doubt, more pain. Mom urged me to cancel the wedding, to walk away from Daniel before it was too late. Her voice was steady, almost pleading, as if she were trying to protect me from further hurt. But I couldn't make sense of anything. I couldn't reconcile the Daniel I knew with the man they were describing. I needed answers, but I wasn't ready to face him. Not yet. Not until I could untangle the truth from the lies. For now, all I could do was try to breathe through the wreckage of my dreams. Leaving my mother's house that day felt like stepping out of a storm and into a void. My mind was spinning, my heart pounding as I drove back home, numb with disbelief. The shock of Lily's confession and my mother's insistence hadn't faded. Instead, it churned in my chest like a storm I couldn't escape. How could something like this have happened? Why hadn't I seen the signs? And most importantly, was any of it true? My heart ached, torn between the love I felt for Daniel and the loyalty I held for my sister. I wasn't ready to confront Daniel, not yet. I needed time to process, to investigate, to make sense of it all before I could face him. For now, I would wait, watch, and dig deeper on my own terms. The days that followed were a haze of confusion and emotional turmoil. Doubts began to creep in, gnawing at the trust one had so firmly placed in Daniel. I studied his every move, every word, searching for signs of guilt or deceit. Conversations with him became tests, each question carefully veiled in casual curiosity. When I asked about Lily, he brushed it off with a laugh, treating the idea of anything happening between them as absurd. His response seemed genuine, calm, and dismissive of the notion. But even as he reassured me, the seed of doubt planted by Lily and my mother continued to grow. Meanwhile, Lily became a shadow of the sister I once knew. She avoided me at every turn, evading my calls and taking hours, sometimes days, to respond to my messages. When I finally managed to speak with her, the vibrant, carefree Lily I had grown up with was gone. She was jittery and anxious, her words hesitant and evasive. Her behavior only added to the growing unease, as though she were hiding something far bigger than she had already revealed. My mother, relentless in her warnings, called nearly every day to insist that I cancel the wedding. She painted vivid pictures of regret and heartbreak, begging me to walk away before it was too late. She was adamant that Lily was telling the truth, that Daniel had betrayed me in the worst way imaginable. Her urgency only compounded the weight of my decision, leaving me torn between the man I loved and the family who claimed to want to protect me. Despite their insistence, I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that there was more to this story. Why now? Why had Lily waited until the eve of my wedding to come forward with such devastating news? It felt orchestrated, deliberate, and I couldn't shake the suspicion that something else was at play. Strange, cryptic messages from unknown numbers began appearing on my phone, warning me to be careful and stay away from Daniel. They sent chills down my spine, adding another layer of mystery to the tangled web surrounding me. When I confronted Lily about the texts, her denials were shaky, her uncertainty only deepening my confusion. In desperation, I began to investigate Daniel's past, hoping to find clarity in his history. What I uncovered only added to my unease. Daniel had been engaged once before, a relationship he had always described as amicable and mutual. But as I dug deeper, I found whispers of a far more tumultuous ending. His ex-fiancée had left abruptly, vanishing from his life overnight. Rumors swirled about infidelity, betrayal, and even an affair with someone close to her. The parallels to my own situation were impossible to ignore. I reached out to an old friend of his ex-fiancé, someone who reluctantly agreed to meet with me. What she revealed was unsettling. According to her, Daniel's ex had been devastated by the breakup. Though she never shared details, she confided in a few friends that she had discovered something that shattered her trust in Daniel completely. She left town without looking back, cutting all ties. The story left me shaken. Had Daniel hidden a pattern of betrayal beneath his charming exterior? Had I been too blinded by love to see the signs? The fear of confronting him with what I'd learned was paralyzing. What if Lily was right? What if the man I was about to marry had been lying to me all along? The tension with Lily finally reached its breaking point when I cornered her at her apartment. Her evasiveness had become unbearable, and I demanded answers. Tears streamed down her face as she insisted it had been a mistake, that she never meant for it to happen. But even as she sobbed, something about her story felt off. Her words were scattered, her narrative shaky, as if she were struggling to keep the details straight. The more I pressed, the more her responses unraveled, revealing cracks in her story that only fueled my suspicions. I left her apartment with more questions than answers. Had Lily lied to me? If so, why? Was she acting on her own, or was there someone else pulling the strings? The truth felt just out of reach, shrouded in layers of deceit and manipulation. For the first time in my life, I doubted the family I had always trusted implicitly. The betrayal, whether real or fabricated, had already left its mark, and I wasn't sure if anything could repair the damage. The thought of someone deliberately trying to tear my life apart hovered, like a dark cloud over my mind.
Why?
What could anyone gain from unraveling everything I had built just days before my wedding? The questions nagged at me constantly as I tried to piece together the puzzle. My trust in Daniel was fractured, and yet I couldn't bring myself to abandon the relationship without all the answers. Each day, the ominous warnings from unknown numbers continued, each message darker and more cryptic than the last. Someone clearly didn't want me to marry Daniel, but whether they had my best interests at heart or were playing a more sinister game, I couldn't tell. With time slipping away, the pressure to make a decision was suffocating. The wedding was just days away, and I felt trapped between two devastating paths. The more I delved into Lily's story, the less sense it made. What had seemed like a straightforward accusation began to unravel, revealing layers of inconsistencies and unanswered questions. Slowly, an unsettling thought took root in my mind. Lily was lying. I was almost certain of it now, but her motives remained a mystery. What could she possibly gain by tearing my relationship with Daniel apart? The first clue came when I started hearing whispers about Lily's recent toxic relationship. It was a fleeting connection she had mentioned in passing but had never introduced to the family. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. Lily was always private about her love life. But the rumors I began to hear painted a darker picture. Friends and old acquaintances hinted at a messy, painful breakup, one that had left Lily deeply hurt and humiliated. Though the details were murky, it became clear that the experience had affected her more than I realized. Was her behavior now a product of that heartbreak? Was she projecting her pain onto me and Daniel, using the pregnancy as a way to lash out? The most shocking revelation, however, came when I began to question whether the pregnancy was real at all. The possibility hit me like a punch to the gut. Could Lily have fabricated something so monumental? My mind replayed every detail of the conversation with her and my mother. The tense looks they exchanged, the urgency in their voices, the insistence that I cancel the wedding. It felt calculated, as though they were operating under some larger plan. The pieces weren't adding up, and my gut told me there was more to this story than they were letting on. Before I could fully process these revelations, the situation took a sharp turn. Daniel found out about the accusations. It happened one evening after I returned home late from meeting with one of Lily's old friends. As soon as I walked through the door, I felt the tension in the air. Daniel was sitting on the couch, his posture stiff, his face a mixture of anger and hurt. His eyes met mine, and in that moment, I knew he knew everything. The conversation that followed was one of the hardest I've ever had. Daniel's voice was tight with fury as he demanded answers. He wanted to know why I hadn't told him sooner, why I had kept something so significant from him while pretending everything was fine. His anger was raw, but beneath it, I could see the hurt, the kind that comes from knowing the person you love has doubted you. I tried to explain. I told him about Lily's confession, the strange texts, the cryptic warnings, and my own confusion. But none of it seemed to matter. Daniel was devastated. He asked how I could even entertain the thought that he would betray me, let alone with my sister. His voice cracked as he expressed his disbelief, and I could feel the weight of his frustration and pain. I tried to calm him, to reassure him that I hadn't made up my mind about anything, that I was trying to figure out the truth. But my words only seemed to inflame him further. He asked me how I could marry someone I didn't trust, how I could build a life with him while harboring these doubts. Then he said the words I never expected to hear. Maybe the wedding was a mistake. Hearing those words from Daniel felt like the floor falling out from under me. I had thought about calling off the wedding more times than I could count, but hearing him voice it made the possibility feel unbearably real. I asked him, my voice barely audible, if that was what he truly wanted. His answer was torn and conflicted. He said it wasn't what he wanted, but he couldn't marry someone who didn't trust him. I felt the weight of his words sink in, heavier than I could bear. Trust was the foundation of any relationship, and in that moment, I realized how fractured ours had become. The accusations, the lies, the secrets, they had created a chasm between us that felt impossible to bridge. I wanted to believe in Daniel, in the love we had built, but the doubt planted by Lily and my mother had grown roots deep within me. As he walked away, his shoulders tense with frustration and hurt, I knew our relationship was standing on a knife's edge. The question was whether it could survive the fall. As Lily's sobs filled the room, the sound pressed into every corner, her guilt palpable and raw. Her tears weren't the silent, remorseful kind. They were wrenching, desperate, the kind that signaled someone on the verge of breaking completely. I watched her, my sister who I had spent years protecting and loving, now crumbling before me under the weight of her confession. And yet, as much as her pain was evident, it didn't quell the rage and hurt boiling inside me. I sat motionless, staring at her, trying to process what she had just told me. The truth, or what she claimed was the truth, hung heavily in the air. Lily had lied. She wasn't pregnant. The accusations about Daniel, the insinuations, and the betrayal, all of it had been fabricated. But it wasn't just her doing. My mother had orchestrated this nightmare, pulling the strings, manipulating my sister into playing a role in this twisted, destructive act. The pieces began to slot into place, each revelation more horrifying than the last. My mother, the woman who had held our fragile family together after Dad left, who had raised me to value loyalty above all else, had become the architect of my devastation. My breath hitched as the enormity of it washed over me. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a fleeting lapse in judgment. This was deliberate, calculated. Lily, through her sobs, tried to explain. Her words came out in fragments, but they painted a grim picture. My mother had convinced her that stopping my wedding was necessary, that Daniel wasn't the right man for me. It wasn't just about the wedding itself, it was about control. My mother couldn't bear to let go of the dynamic she had cultivated for years. To her, I wasn't just her daughter. I was her anchor, the glue that held the family together. And now, with Daniel in my life, I was slipping out of her grasp. She said it was for your own good. Lily whispered through her tears, her voice hoarse. She told me you'd thank her one day. That you'd see Daniel for who he really was. I couldn't breathe. My mother's words, repeated by Lily, echoed in my mind. For your own good. That phrase, so twisted in its intent, made my stomach turn. My mother didn't care about what was good for me. She cared about keeping me within her grasp. Lily kept talking, her confessions spilling out like a dam that had finally broken. She admitted that she had felt trapped, that she didn't want to go along with the plan, but she had been too scared to defy my mother. The pregnancy lie had been a desperate move, something my mother had encouraged when it became clear that Daniel and I were too close to let a simple accusation derail us. It was a way to ensure I would break things off, a way to ensure I'd come running back to the fold. I didn't know what else to do, Lily choked out. I thought if I didn't go along with her, she'd turn on me too. Her words made my chest tighten. A part of me felt sympathy for her. I could see now how my mother had manipulated her, how she had used Lily's vulnerability as a tool to execute her plan. But that sympathy was overshadowed by my anger, my disbelief that Lily had allowed herself to become a part of this. She could have stopped it. She could have come to me, trusted me, told me the truth before it got this far. Instead, she had chosen to lie. I finally found my voice, though it was trembling with suppressed emotion. You destroyed everything, I said, my words slow and deliberate. You stood by while she poisoned my relationship. You lied to me, Lily. How could you? Lily didn't answer. She just sobbed harder, her hands covering her face, as if she couldn't bear to look at me. The sight of her, so broken, stirred something in me, anger, sadness, pity, but I pushed it all aside. I couldn't let her tears distract me. This wasn't just about her guilt. This was about me reclaiming my life. I stood up, needing to put space between us. My hands were shaking, and my heart felt like it was pounding out of my chest. I need time, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I can't deal with this right now. Lily looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. She tried to say something, but I held up a hand to stop her. No, I said firmly. You've said enough. I left her apartment without another word, the door closing behind me with a finality that echoed in my ears. Outside, the air was cold and biting, but it did little to numb the storm of emotions swirling inside me. My mother's betrayal, Lily's complicity, the lies, the manipulation, it was too much. I felt like I was drowning, unable to catch my breath as the weight of everything pressed down on me. When I got home, I collapsed onto the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling. My mind replayed everything Lily had said, every detail, every moment of the past few weeks that had led to this. The memories felt tainted now. My mother's encouragements, her insistence on family loyalty, her subtle digs at Daniel, it all made sense in a way that made my stomach churn. And Daniel, my heart ached at the thought of him. I had doubted him. I had let my family's lies take root in my mind, poisoning the trust we had built together. How could I face him now? How could I explain everything without it sounding like a pathetic excuse? But I had to try. I couldn't let this break us. Not if there was still a chance to salvage what we had. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed his number. The call rang and rang, each passing second making my chest tighten. Finally, his voice came through, distant and guarded. We need to talk, I said, my voice barely steady. There was a long pause on the other end before he replied, Yeah, I think we do. Hanging up the phone, I felt a sense of determination settle over me. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was ready. Ready to face Daniel, to tell him everything, to fight for our relationship if there was still something to fight for. And as for my family had broken my trust in a way I never thought possible. But I wouldn't let them win. I wouldn't let their lies and manipulation define me. This was my life, my future, and it was time to take it back. As Lily's trembling voice unraveled the truth, every word she spoke chipped away at the foundation of my world. She confessed, through tears that felt almost too raw to be anything but genuine, that the entire scheme had been orchestrated by our mother. My mother, the woman who raised me, who instilled in me a deep sense of loyalty to family, who I believed would do anything for my happiness, had betrayed me in the most calculated and devastating way possible. Lily revealed the depths of manipulation she had endured. Our mother, consumed by the fear of losing me to Daniel, had coerced Lily into fabricating the pregnancy. She had planted the idea that Daniel was a threat, someone who would drive a wedge between us, someone who would isolate me from my family. Lily, already vulnerable, had succumbed to the pressure, convinced that our mother's warped intentions were rooted in love and protection. The weight of her confession left me silent, my mind spiraling as I tried to make sense of it all. My sister's guilt was palpable, her sobs punctuated by fragmented apologies. She admitted that she had hoped I would uncover the truth before things spiraled out of control. But she had underestimated our mother's ability to twist reality and wield her influence over us like a weapon. When I finally spoke, my voice was low, trembling with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. I asked Lily why she hadn't come to me sooner, why she had let the lie fester and grow until it had nearly destroyed everything. She had no answers, only more tears. And as much as I wanted to direct all my anger at her, I couldn't ignore the puppet master pulling the strings. I left Lily's apartment feeling both betrayed and hollow. There was no doubt in my mind about what I needed to do next. I had to confront my mother, the woman who had always championed family above all else, who had positioned herself as the protector and glue holding us together, had been the architect of our destruction. When I arrived at her house, the weight of the confrontation bore down on me. She greeted me with her usual warmth, her smile wide and inviting, as if she hadn't shattered my world just days before. She offered me tea, the picture of maternal calm, but I didn't sit. I didn't even respond. Instead, I stood rigid, my voice breaking as I told her I knew everything. Her reaction was almost theatrical. For a fleeting moment, there was a crack in her facade, a flicker of panic, but she quickly composed herself. She denied it at first, claiming ignorance, but I pressed on, my words sharp and unwavering. I told her that Lily had confessed, that I knew about the lies, about the manipulation. There was no point in pretending anymore. When she realized I wouldn't back down, her demeanor shifted. Her tone turned icy, her words measured but dripping with something sinister. She admitted to everything but framed it as an act of love. She insisted that she had been protecting me, that Daniel was dangerous, that she couldn't stand the thought of me being taken away. Her voice grew more frantic as she tried to justify her actions, painting herself as the martyr who had sacrificed everything for my sake. But I saw through her. This wasn't about love. It was about control. My mother had spent years ensuring that I remained tethered to her, that I was dependent on her in ways I hadn't even realized. She had cloaked her manipulation in the guise of maternal devotion, and now that I was slipping out of her grasp, she had resorted to sabotage. I demanded to know why she had dragged Lily into her schemes, why she had allowed her to become collateral damage in this twisted game. Her response was cold, dismissive. She called Lily weak, easily influenced, incapable of understanding the bigger picture. It was the same line of reasoning she had used to justify everything, family first, no matter the cost. In that moment, I realized something fundamental. This wasn't about Daniel, or the wedding, or even me. This was about my mother's inability to let go, her desperate need to maintain control over a world that was slipping away from her. The woman I had once trusted implicitly had revealed herself to be a stranger, someone I could no longer rely on. I told her, with all the strength I could muster, that I was done. Done with the lies, the manipulation, the control. I wasn't hers to keep or to mold. I was my own person, and I was choosing my own path. Her expression hardened, and for a moment, I thought she might argue, might try to drag me back into her web of deceit. But she said nothing. She simply watched as I walked out of her house, leaving behind the remnants of a bond that had been irrevocably broken. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I met with Daniel and laid everything bare. The lies, the manipulation, the doubts that had nearly consumed me. He listened quietly, his pain evident, but his love unwavering. He told me he understood why I had been hesitant, why I had struggled to trust, but he assured me that he wasn't going anywhere. He would wait for me, for as long as it took. And in that moment I knew that despite everything, Daniel was my future. Not my mother's fears, not Lily's guilt, not the lies that had threatened to tear us apart. It was Daniel, standing there with his quiet strength and unwavering support. When our wedding day arrived, it was different from what I had imagined as a little girl. The absence of my mother and sister was a wound that hadn't fully healed, but it was also a reminder of the choices I had made. Walking down that aisle wasn't just about committing to Daniel, it was about reclaiming my life, about choosing a future that was mine and mine alone. As I took Daniel's hand and spoke my vows, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for weeks. This was my moment, my decision, and nothing, no manipulation, no betrayal, could take it away from me.